I stood in the fellowship hall of the First Ebenezer Baptist Church, the air thick with the smell of fried catfish and sweet victory, and handed my son a check for $12,453. That money, raised from the sweat of my brow and the boundless love of my community, was his ticket to a new life. My thank you just 1 week later was to be publicly disowned in a hotel ballroom, dismissed as a nameless, invisible servant. When I tried to hug my own child, the boy whose future I had just built with my own 2 hands, he looked a wealthy stranger in the eye and called me the janitor. He thought my love, my work, and my very identity were things to be swept into a closet and hidden away. But he forgot one crucial thing about the woman who raised him. A janitor knows everyone's secrets, holds all the keys, and most importantly, knows exactly how to clean house. And I was about to make my son's life spotless. Before I begin, thank you for being here. For being part of this community. If you believe that a mother's love is a crown, not a doormat, and that a good name is worth more than all the gold in the world, you are in the right place. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. Now let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Vivian Sinclair, and for 72 years, my life has been rooted in the rich red clay of Birmingham, Alabama. My world was not one of boardrooms or bank vaults. It was a world of scuffed hallways, chalk dust, and the unwavering belief that a good name was the only inheritance a person truly needed. For 35 years I was the head custodian at Northwood High School. To some, that might sound like a humble profession. But in my community in the heart of Ensley, I was an institution. I wasn't just the woman who mopped the floors. I was Sister Vivian, the one who knew every child's name, who slipped an extra $1 to the kid who couldn't afford lunch, who stayed late to make sure the gym was perfect for the big game. My office was a closet, but my influence was felt in every classroom. But my real gift, the one God blessed me with, was the power of persuasion. Not for myself, never for myself, but for my community. If a family's house burned down, I was the one organizing the clothes drive. If the church choir needed new robes, I was the one frying the fish and selling the plates. People in my community didn't have much, but what they had, they gave freely when I asked. They trusted me. They knew that every $1 given to Sister Vivian would be stretched until it screamed and put to its highest and best use. My reputation was my currency, and it was a currency more valuable than gold. All of this, my entire life's work, was for one person, my son Marcus. He was my miracle, the late-in-life child I raised alone after his father passed. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, brilliant, and destined for a world far beyond the smokestacks of Birmingham. He was the golden boy of First Ebenezer, a star student, a gifted basketball player, and the living embodiment of all my hopes and prayers. I poured every ounce of my being into him, ensuring he had the best of everything I could afford and the best of everything I couldn't. This year, his senior year, he had achieved the impossible. He had been named a finalist for the Phoenix Scholarship, a full-ride 4-year scholarship to Duke University. It was a golden ticket, a chance to escape the gravity of our circumstances and soar into the stratosphere of the elite. But there was a catch, a final, formidable hurdle. The Phoenix Scholarship wasn't just about grades and test scores. It was about character and community. It required each finalist to spearhead a community support match, a fundraising campaign to raise $10,000. The money wouldn't go to the student. It would be donated to the scholarship fund in the student's name, a testament to their community's belief in them. It was a test of leadership, of influence, of roots. When Marcus came to me with the letter, his face a mask of hope and fear, I felt a surge of pride so fierce it took my breath away. This was not a challenge, it was a calling. This was the work I was born to do. Don't you worry your handsome head about a thing, I told him, my voice ringing with a confidence that left no room for doubt. Your community believes in you because I believe in you. We'll get that money. And so began the campaign. It was the culmination of my life's work. I became a whirlwind of activity, a general marshalling my troops for one final, glorious battle. My modest house in Ensley became a campaign headquarters. I started with a call to my pastor, the formidable Reverend Dr. Franklin Hayes, who gave me his blessing to make an announcement from the pulpit. The next Sunday I stood before my church family, not as a custodian, but as a proud mother, and laid out the mission. The response was immediate. The $1 for a Scholar Drive was born, with ushers standing at the doors after service with buckets that quickly filled to overflowing. But that was just the beginning. I leveraged every ounce of goodwill I had accumulated over a lifetime. I called the owner of the local print shop, a boy I once caught smoking behind the gym, and set straight, and he printed 500 glossy flyers for free. I went to the manager of the grocery store whose children I had watched grow up, and he donated all the catfish, cornmeal, and cooking oil for the fish fry. The deacons of the church fired up the fryers, the women of the missionary society made their famous coleslaw and baked beans, and we sold plates until we ran out of fish, raising over $3,000 in a single afternoon. I went to my old stomping grounds, Northwood High, and set up a table in the cafeteria. The teachers who had known me for decades stuffed 20s into the donation jar. The students, the ones Marcus now felt he was so far above, pooled their lunch money to contribute. They weren't just donating to a scholarship. They were donating to Ms. Vivian's son. My name, my legacy of trust, was the engine driving it all. For 6 weeks I worked tirelessly. I walked door to door, my old knees aching, collecting 1s and 5s from neighbors who had little to spare but gave with open hearts. I stood outside the grocery store on weekends with my donation jar, smiling and thanking every single person who stopped. Marcus was mostly absent during this time. He was busy, he said, with his advanced placement classes, with his basketball practice, with preparing for the life of a scholar. He saw the fundraising as my project, a quaint, folksy task that was beneath his new elevated station. I didn't mind. I was happy to do the work. This was my gift to him, the final invisible foundation stone for the magnificent palace his life was about to become. The final celebration was held in the fellowship hall of First Ebenezer. The entire community was there. The air buzzed with excitement. I had kept the grand total a secret, and when Reverend Hayes called me to the front, I felt like I was floating. I stood at the podium, looked out at the sea of familiar, loving faces, and unfolded the piece of paper in my trembling hand. "My dear friends, my beloved community," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "You were asked to show your support for one of our own. You were asked to invest in a dream. And with the grace of God and your incredible generosity, I am proud to announce that we have raised $12,453. The hall erupted. The sound was deafening, a roar of applause, cheers, and stomping feet. It was the sound of a community celebrating its own power, its own love. I saw Marcus in the front row, his face a perfect picture of stunned, grateful disbelief. I presented him with the ceremonial check, a giant cardboard novelty, but the pride in his eyes was real. He hugged me, whispering, "Thank you, Mama. I can't believe you did it." In that moment, all the aching joints, all the sleepless nights, all the weary hours were worth it. I had done more than just raise money. I had shown my son the depth and breadth of the love that surrounded him. I had handed him his future, built piece by the hands of the very people he was so eager to leave behind. I believed with all my heart that he understood the weight of that gift. It was a belief I would hold on to for one more week, before it was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The Phoenix Scholarship Awards ceremony was not an event, it was a coronation. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Tutwiler Hotel, a historic landmark in downtown Birmingham that dripped with the kind of old-world opulence my son now craved. The invitation had specified black tie, a term that felt like it belonged to a different language, a different universe. But I was determined to honor the occasion, to show my son that his mother could stand proudly in any room no matter how grand. I spent a week's worth of my pension on a new dress, a beautiful floor-length gown of deep lavender lace, and a matching hat with a delicate netted veil. When I looked in the mirror before leaving my house, I saw not a retired janitor, but a queen mother, ready to witness her son's ascension to the throne. I took a taxi downtown, the cost an indulgence I could ill afford, but I didn't want to arrive in my 10-year-old sedan. As I walked through the hotel's marble lobby, my sensible heels clicking softly on the polished floors, I felt a flutter of nervousness. The air was different here. It was thin and cool, scented with money and privilege. The people who glided past me were draped in silk and diamonds, their laughter light and effortless. They were the patrons, the benefactors, the kind of people Marcus would now call his peers. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers as big as wagon wheels hung from the impossibly high ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of round tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly in the corner. I found my assigned table near the back, a clear indication of my status as community rather than patron. I didn't mind. My view of the stage was perfect, and that was all that mattered. I watched as Marcus moved through the room. He was a different person here. In our neighborhood he was confident. Here he was transformed. He wore a brand new tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He glided, he charmed, he laughed at the jokes of men old enough to be his grandfather. He had shed his Ensley skin and slipped seamlessly into this new one. A part of me marveled at his adaptability, his chameleon-like ability to belong anywhere. Another, smaller part of me felt a pang of something I couldn't name, a sense of loss, as if I were watching him drift away from a shore I could never leave. The dinner was a series of small, elegant dishes with French names I couldn't pronounce. I ate what I could, my stomach a tight knot of pride and anxiety. Finally, the moment arrived. The chairman of the Phoenix Scholarship Board, a handsome, silver-haired man named Mr. Alistair Finch, took the stage. He spoke at length about the importance of philanthropy, about nurturing the next generation of leaders. Then he began to speak about Marcus. He praised his academic achievements, his athletic prowess, his poise and maturity. He mentioned in a vague and sweeping statement that Marcus had galvanized the support of his community, a phrase that sanitized my 6 weeks of grueling work into a neat, palatable soundbite. And then he called Marcus to the stage. My son. My boy. He walked up to the podium, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, and he looked like he was born there. He was handed a heavy crystal award, and he smiled, a perfect, polished smile that reached every corner of the vast room. My heart felt like it would beat its way right out of my chest. Tears of joy welled in my eyes, blurring the magnificent scene before me. He began his acceptance speech. His voice, amplified by the microphone, was smooth and deep, devoid of the southern accent he had grown up with. It was the voice of a news anchor, of a politician. He thanked the board, he thanked Mr. Finch personally, he thanked his teachers and his basketball coach. He spoke of his dreams of becoming a corporate attorney, of giving back, one day when he too was a captain of industry. He was eloquent, he was charming, he was flawless. And he never once said my name. He never once mentioned the fish fries, the bake sales, the donation jars. He never once acknowledged the woman in the lavender dress sitting in the back of the room, the woman whose name and reputation had been the very key that unlocked this door for him. The speech ended. The room erupted in polite, sustained applause. The ceremony was over. People began to stand, to mingle, to congratulate the new scholars. I remained seated for a moment, my heart aching with a confusing mix of pride and a sharp, stinging hurt. But I pushed the feeling down. He was nervous. He was overwhelmed. He had simply forgotten. I stood up, my purse clutched in my hand, and began to make my way toward the stage. I just wanted to hug him. I wanted to wrap my arms around my son and tell him how proud I was, to feel his arms around me, a moment of shared private victory in this grand public space. The crowd was thick, a forest of tuxedos and evening gowns, but I navigated it with a singular purpose. I finally reached the front of the room. Marcus was standing near the stage, deep in conversation with Mr. Finch. He was laughing, holding his crystal award, the picture of success. He saw me approaching. For a fleeting, infinitesimal moment, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, a shadow that crossed his perfect, smiling face. And then it was gone, replaced by a cool, neutral mask. I reached him, my face beaming, my arms already beginning to open for an embrace. "Marcus, baby," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "You were wonderful." Mr. Finch, the chairman, turned to me. He was a tall man, and he looked down at me with an expression of mild patrician curiosity. His eyes took in my simple lavender dress, my slightly old-fashioned hat. It was clear I was not one of them. "Marcus," Mr. Finch said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Who is this lovely woman?" This was the moment. The moment for my son to turn, to put his arm around my shoulder and to say, "Mr. Finch, this is the woman who made it all possible. This is my mother, Vivian Sinclair." It was the easiest, most natural sentence in the world. But Marcus did not say it. He looked at me, his mother, the woman who had given him life and then a future. He looked at my open, loving face. And then he turned back to the wealthy, powerful man beside him. He gave a small, tight, dismissive smile. And in a voice that was steady and clear, a voice that cut me more deeply than any physical blow ever could, he said the words that would alter the course of both our lives forever. "Oh, her," he said with a slight, casual laugh. "She's just one of the janitors here. A big fan of the program. The words hung in the air between us. The janitor. Not his mother. Not the woman who raised him. Not the fundraiser who had secured his place on this very stage. A janitor. A nameless, faceless, invisible servant. Mr. Finch, accepting this explanation without question, gave me a brief, dismissive nod, the kind one gives to a piece of furniture or a member of the catering staff. He then turned his full attention back to Marcus, clapping him on the shoulder and steering him away to introduce him to another wealthy patron. I was left standing alone just feet from the stage. My arms, which had been open for a hug, were frozen in a half-embrace, my hands hovering in the empty air. The sound of the string quartet, the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses, it all faded into a dull roaring buzz in my ears. I was invisible. I had been erased. In the biggest moment of his life, my son had looked at me and with 2 simple words he had swept me away with the trash. I don't remember the taxi ride home. I don't remember walking through my front door. My first clear memory after the world tilted off its axis is of sitting in my favorite armchair in the living room, the one Samuel had always loved, still wearing my lavender dress and hat. The house was dark, save for the pale yellow light of a single street lamp filtering through the lace curtains. It was quiet. A deep, profound silence that was the polar opposite of the noise and glitter of the ballroom. The silence was a tomb and I had been buried alive in it. The word echoed in the hollow chambers of my heart. Janitor. 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 It wasn't the word itself that was the wound. I had been a janitor. I had worn that title with pride. I had taken an honest job and performed it with excellence and dignity for 35 years. The wound was in the way he had said it. The dismissive tone. The casual laugh. The "oh, her" that had preceded it. It was the lie. It was the erasure. He had used my life's work as a shield to hide his own origins. He had taken my identity and twisted it into a tool of his own social climbing, a convenient explanation for the presence of a simple old black woman who clearly did not belong in his new rarefied world. The initial shock, the feeling of being winded as if by a physical blow, slowly gave way to a grief so vast and so deep it felt bottomless. This was not a simple mistake. This was not a thoughtless comment made in the heat of the moment. This was a choice. A calculated decision made in a split second. He had weighed his mother's love against the approval of a wealthy stranger, and he had chosen the stranger. He had looked at the 2 halves of his life, the humble, loving world that had nurtured him and the glittering, ambitious world he now craved, and he had severed the cord to the first with the cold, sharp blade of his shame. I sat there for hours, motionless in the dark. The tears I expected to come never did. The pain was too structural, too fundamental for the simple release of tears. It was the feeling of a building whose foundation has been dynamited. Everything you thought was solid, everything you built your life upon was now just dust and rubble. My love for Marcus had been the foundation of my entire existence, and he had just declared it worthless. My eyes, accustomed to the gloom, began to drift around the room. They fell upon my wall of blessings. It was the focal point of my living room, a testament to a life of service and community. It wasn't filled with expensive art. It was covered from floor to ceiling with the artifacts of my life, of our life. There were framed photos of Marcus at every stage of his life. His first steps, his kindergarten graduation, his baptism at First Ebenezer, him holding his high school basketball trophy. But interspersed with the photos of Marcus were dozens of other frames. There was the Custodian of the Year plaque from Northwood High. There were framed, handwritten thank you notes from students who had graduated 20 years ago. There was a certificate of appreciation from the city for my community service. There was a framed newspaper clipping about the fundraiser I had organized for the family whose house had burned down. And right in the center, tacked to the wall, was the flyer for the fish fry we had just held for Marcus's scholarship. The one with my picture on it. Come support Sister Vivian Sinclair as she raises funds for her son Marcus. I got up from my chair, my body stiff and sore, and walked over to the wall. I ran my fingers over the smooth glass of the frames. Each one was a story. Each one was a piece of my identity. And as I looked at them, a new feeling began to creep through the fog of my grief. It was a slow-burning ember of anger. Righteous, clarifying anger. That scholarship. The very thing that had placed him on that stage was not his alone. It was not a product of his solitary genius. It was a product of this wall. It was built on the trust one had earned from the community. It was paid for by the people who respected my name. He hadn't just called his mother a janitor. He had called the efforts of our entire church, our entire neighborhood, nothing. He had taken the love and sacrifice of hundreds of hardworking people, packaged it up, and presented it as his own singular achievement, and then had the audacity to be ashamed of its source. My son had not just disowned me. He had disowned his entire history. He had disowned the very ground he had grown in. A thought, cold and hard and clear as a diamond, formed in my mind. He thinks a janitor is invisible. He forgot a janitor holds the keys to every single room and knows how to clean house. The metaphor was so perfect, so potent. It sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated energy through my weary body. The grief didn't disappear, but it was transformed. It was no longer a passive, drowning sorrow. It was now fuel. My mind, once a chaotic storm of hurt and confusion, became laser-focused. A plan began to form, not a plan for revenge in the petty sense, but a plan for justice. A plan for a great rebalancing of the scales. He had publicly erased me. I would, in turn, publicly reclaim my story. He had used my work to build his name. I would use my name to build a new legacy, one that he would have no part in. He had made a choice in that ballroom. Now I would make mine. I looked back at the wall, at the smiling face of my son in his basketball uniform. The love I felt for that boy, the boy who had existed before this night, was still there, a phantom limb that ached with memory. But the boy on the stage, the man he was becoming, was a stranger to me. And you do not owe a stranger your life's legacy. I turned away from the wall. I walked into my bedroom, my steps no longer hesitant and grieving, but firm and purposeful. I opened the small locked box where I kept my important papers, the deed to my house, my insurance policies, my late husband's honorable discharge from the army, and my will. It was a simple document drawn up years ago, leaving everything I owned, the house, my savings, my pension benefits, to my only son, Marcus Sinclair. I took the document out of its envelope. I held in my hands the sum total of my life's work, the financial manifestation of my love. And with a clarity that was both heartbreaking and liberating, I knew what I had to do. I was not just going to change it. I was going to set it on fire and build something new and beautiful from its ashes. Something that would honor the community he had scorned. Something that would bear my name and my name alone. The janitor was about to take inventory, and she was about to change the locks. The morning after the ceremony, the sun rose over Birmingham with an indifferent, brassy glare. For me, it was the dawn of a new era. The Vivian Sinclair who had gone to bed heartbroken and erased was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the fires of disrespect. A woman with a singular, unshakable purpose. My grief had not been extinguished. It had been weaponized. It was no longer a weakness. It was my armor. My first act of this new life was an act of deliberate, deafening silence. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Marcus. A text message. "Morning, Mama. You left so quickly last night. Everything okay?" The casual, oblivious nature of the question was almost as insulting as the act itself. He was testing the waters, hoping I would swallow my pain as I always had and pretend that nothing was wrong. He was hoping the old Vivian would show up, the one who would absorb any hurt for the sake of his comfort. But that Vivian was dead. I looked at the message and with a steady finger I deleted it without replying. I did not call him. I did not text him back. My silence was not passive. It was strategic. It was a wall and I was building it brick by brick. He had placed me in a category of nameless servants. I would respond by removing myself entirely from his world, by becoming a ghost he could not reach. My strategy had two fronts. The first was moral and public. The second was legal and permanent. For both I needed an ally. I needed someone whose authority was unquestionable, whose wisdom was deep, and whose loyalty to me and my community was absolute. There was only one person who fit that description. I put on my Sunday best, the same lavender dress from the night before. I was not ashamed of it. I was reclaiming it. It was no longer the dress of my humiliation. It was now my suit of armor. I walked the 6 blocks from my house to the First Ebenezer Baptist Church. It was a Friday morning and the church was quiet, a peaceful sanctuary from the turmoil in my heart. I found Reverend Dr. Franklin Hayes in his pastoral study, a room lined with books from floor to ceiling, smelling of old paper and lemon polish. Reverend Hayes was a man carved from granite and grace. We had known each other for more than 50 years. He had preached my husband's funeral, he had christened Marcus, and he had eaten more of my fish fry plates than any man alive. He looked up from his desk as I entered, his warm, wise eyes immediately registering the profound shift in my demeanor. He saw not just sadness but a new, steely resolve. "Sister Vivian," he said, his voice a deep, resonant bass that could soothe a crying baby or call down fire from heaven. "Come in. Sit down. Your spirit looks troubled." I sat in the worn leather chair opposite his desk. I did not weep. I did not rage. I recounted the events of the previous night with the cold, devastating clarity of a witness giving testimony in a court of law. I told him about the fundraising, the community's love, the grand ballroom, the pride in my heart. And then I told him what Marcus had said. I repeated the exact words. "Oh, her? She's just one of the janitors here." As I spoke, I watched the compassion in Reverend Hayes's face slowly morph into a righteous, thunderous anger. His hands, which had been resting on his desk, curled into tight fists. He was not just hearing the story of a mother's pain. He was hearing the story of a communal sin. Marcus had not just dishonored his mother. He had dishonored the entire congregation, the entire community that had lifted him up. He had violated a sacred trust. When I finished, the silence in the study was thick and heavy. Reverend Hayes leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed for a long moment. When he opened them, they were blazing with purpose. "Vivian," he said, dropping the formal sister for the first time in years. "This act of dishonor was public. Therefore, the reclamation of your honor must also be public. This testimony does not belong in the dark, whispered between us. It belongs in the light. It belongs in the Lord's house, before the very people whose love he has scorned." My heart leaped. This was what I had hoped for but had not dared to ask. "What do you mean, Reverend?" "I mean," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a powerful, determined whisper, "that this Sunday during the 11 o'clock service after the sermon, I am turning the pulpit over to you. You will stand before your church family and you will tell them your story. You will give your testimony. You will let the truth ring out from the highest place in this community." It was a breathtaking offer. The pulpit at First Ebenezer was sacred ground. To be given that platform was to be given the most powerful microphone in our world. It was the ultimate validation. "I will do it," I said, my voice not trembling with fear, but vibrating with a newfound strength. "I know you will," he said with a grim smile. "Now for the second front." He picked up his telephone. "There is the matter of legacy. The boy has chosen to sever his roots. It is your right to sever the branch." He dialed a number from memory. "Yes, I need to speak with Attorney Childs," he said into the receiver. "Tell her Reverend Hayes is on the line. It's a matter of profound urgency." He was connecting me with Sister Evelyn Childs, a member of our congregation and one of the sharpest, most formidable attorneys in Birmingham. She was a no-nonsense woman who specialized in wills and estate planning, known for her ironclad contracts and her fierce advocacy for her clients. Reverend Hayes explained the situation to her in a few concise sentences, his voice leaving no room for argument. He made an appointment for me to see her that very afternoon. When he hung up the phone, he looked at me, his expression one of absolute, unwavering support. "Evelyn will handle the legalities," he said. "She will ensure your final wishes are executed with the precision of a surgeon. Your job, Vivian, is to prepare your heart for Sunday. Speak your truth. Let the community be your witness and your shield." I left the church that day feeling as though I had just enlisted a 5-star general and his entire army. I had a platform for my public vindication and a legal architect for my permanent legacy. The strategy was in place. The pieces were moving. I spent the rest of the day and all of Saturday in quiet contemplation. I did not write a speech. I did not rehearse my words. The story was etched into my soul. It was a simple, brutal truth, and all I had to do was open my mouth and let it out. Marcus continued to text me, his messages growing more frantic. "Mama, are you mad at me? Please call me." I continued to ignore them. He was operating in a world of personal feelings, of apologies and hurt emotions. I was now operating in a world of strategy, of consequences, of justice. We were no longer speaking the same language. And on Sunday the whole world would hear mine. Sunday morning arrived, crisp and bright. I dressed with the care of a warrior preparing for battle. I chose a different dress this time, a simple but elegant navy blue one, the color of deep water and authority. I wore a single strand of my late husband's pearls. My lavender suit of armor had served its purpose. Today was not about reclamation but about proclamation. Today I was not a victim. I was a witness. The 11 a.m. service at First Ebenezer Baptist Church was the spiritual and social center of our universe. It was the place where news was shared, where support was given, where the community came together as one body. And on this Sunday the church was packed to the rafters. Word had clearly gotten out that something significant was going to happen. There was a current of anticipation in the air, a low hum of curiosity and concern. I saw Marcus sitting in the second pew with some of his friends. He looked anxious, his eyes scanning the congregation, searching for me. When our eyes finally met, he gave me a tentative, hopeful smile. He had no idea what was coming. He thought my anger was a private storm that would eventually pass. He could not conceive that I would bring our family business into the sanctuary. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he called his mother. He thought I would protect his reputation above all else. He was wrong. I was here to protect my own. I sat in my usual spot in the fourth row, nodding politely to my neighbors, my face a mask of serene composure. Inside, my heart was beating a steady, powerful rhythm like a war drum. I felt no fear. I felt only a profound sense of rightness. Reverend Hayes preached a sermon that seemed as if it had been written just for this moment. He spoke of honor, of sacrifice, of the fifth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother. He spoke of the sin of pride, of forgetting the soil from which you have grown. His voice boomed through the sanctuary, each word a stone being laid in the foundation for my testimony. He never once looked at Marcus, but the weight of his words seemed to press down on the boy, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Finally, the sermon concluded. The choir sang a final, stirring hymn. But instead of moving to the benediction, Reverend Hayes held up a hand for silence. He stood at the pulpit, his expression grave, and looked out over the congregation. My dear brothers and sisters, he began, his voice dropping to a serious, resonant tone that immediately commanded everyone's full attention. Before we close in prayer, there is a member of this church family who has a testimony to share. A testimony of sacrifice and of a pain that must be brought into the light to be healed. I am now turning the floor over to our beloved Sister Vivian Sinclair. A collective, audible gasp went through the sanctuary. All heads turned toward me. The rustling of programs and the shuffling of feet ceased. A thick, heavy silence fell over the room. I saw Marcus's face. The color drained from it. His eyes widened in disbelief and dawning horror. This was his worst nightmare, realized in the most public way imaginable. With a deep breath, I stood up and walked the long aisle to the front of the church. My steps were slow, steady, and dignified. I did not stumble. I did not waver. As I passed Marcus's pew, I did not look at him. My focus was on the pulpit, the sacred desk that was now my stage. I ascended the 2 steps and stood behind the heavy oak lectern. I looked out at the sea of faces, faces I had known my entire life. These were the people who had bought my fish plates, who had dropped their dollars into my collection jars, who had trusted me. This was my jury. I gripped the sides of the pulpit, my knuckles white. I cleared my throat, and the sound was amplified through the microphone, a small human noise in the vast silent space. And then I began to speak. My voice was not the voice of a weeping victim. It was the clear, steady voice of a witness delivering a sworn statement. "Good morning, church," I said. The words echoed, filled with a calm authority. "I'm not up here today to ask for your pity. I am here to tell you the truth. Because you are a part of this story." I started at the beginning. I reminded them of the Phoenix Scholarship, of the $10,000 community support match. "You all know what we did," I said, my eyes sweeping across the pews. "Deacon Charles, you and the men's fellowship fried the fish. Sister May, your sweet potato pies sold out in 20 minutes. The children from the Sunday school went door to door. We all did this. Together. We raised over $12,000 to show the world that this community supports its own." A murmur of proud agreement rippled through the congregation. "And it worked," I continued. "My son Marcus was awarded the scholarship. And on Thursday night I put on my best dress and I went downtown to the big hotel to watch him accept it. My heart was so full of pride I thought it might burst right out of my chest." I paused, letting the weight of that pride settle in the room. He got up on that stage and he gave a beautiful speech. Thanked all the rich folks who run the scholarship. And then when it was over, I did what any mother in this room would do. I went up to hug my child. I could feel the emotion in the room building. The women were nodding, their eyes shining with understanding. A very important man, the chairman of the board, saw me. And he asked my son who I was. This was it. The moment of detonation. I looked directly at Marcus for the first time. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror. He was shaking his head slightly, a silent, pathetic plea for me to stop. I did not. I leaned closer to the microphone. My voice dropped, but it lost none of its power. If anything, the quiet intensity made it more devastating. The man asked him, "Marcus, who is this lovely woman?" And my son who was standing on a stage built by our love and our sacrifice. He looked at that rich man and he smiled. And he said, "Oh, her? She's just one of the janitors here." The gasp that filled the church was so sharp, so unified, it was like a physical blow. It was a sound of collective shock, of communal horror. I saw people's hands fly to their mouths. I saw Deacon Charles, a man of immense stature, physically recoil in his seat. I saw Sister May's face crumple in pain, not for me but with me. The emotional bomb had detonated and the fallout was immediate and catastrophic. I let the weight of that statement hang in the air for a long, terrible moment. Then I concluded my testimony. I worked as a janitor for 35 years. There is no shame in that work. The shame is in the son who is ashamed of his mother. The shame is in the child who would erase his own history for the approval of strangers. I just wanted you, my family, to know the truth. Because you didn't raise that money for the son of a janitor. You raised it for the son of Vivian Sinclair. And I thank you. I stepped back from the pulpit. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was a silence thick with judgment, with sorrow, with a profound and unified sense of outrage. Then slowly, one by one, the congregation began to stand. Not for me but in solidarity with me. They stood in silent, powerful judgment of the boy cowering in the second pew. I walked back down the aisle, my head held high. No one looked at Marcus. It was as if he had ceased to exist. They looked at me, their eyes filled with love, with respect, with a shared, righteous anger. The community had heard my testimony. They had been my witness. And they had delivered their verdict. My son's public life in this town was over. The fallout from my Sunday testimony was not loud and explosive. It was quiet, swift, and utterly devastating, like a deep frost that kills the roots of a plant overnight. Marcus had not just been embarrassed. He had been excommunicated. In the black community, and especially within the sacred walls of the church, the sin of dishonoring your mother is profound. To do it so publicly, after that same mother and that same church had just paved your way, was unforgivable. After the service, no one approached him to offer congratulations. The friends who had been sitting with him melted away into the crowd, avoiding his eyes. The older members of the church, the deacons and mothers who had known him since he was a baby, looked right through him. He had become a ghost in his own home. The community that had spent a lifetime building him up dismantled his social standing in a single silent afternoon. The story, as stories do, spread far beyond the walls of First Ebenezer. It ripped through the social fabric of Birmingham's black community. People talked about it in beauty shops and barber shops, over Sunday dinners and Monday morning coffee. The janitor story became a cautionary tale, a modern-day parable about pride and ingratitude. The scholarship board at the Phoenix Foundation, a body deeply concerned with public image and the character of their recipients, somehow received an anonymous, detailed letter recounting the events of both the awards ceremony and the subsequent church service. A week later, Marcus received a formal notice that his scholarship was being placed under ethical review. The golden ticket he had paid for with my dignity was suddenly in jeopardy. His bright future, once a certainty, was now shrouded in a fog of his own making. While his world was crumbling, I was quietly building my own. The Monday after my testimony, I had my appointment with attorney Evelyn Childs. She was everything Reverend Hayes had promised. Sharp, empathetic, and ruthlessly efficient. I sat in her downtown office with its panoramic view of the city, and I told her my second story. Not the story of my pain, but the story of my purpose. I want to change my will, I stated, my voice calm and resolute. Completely. She listened patiently as I laid out my wishes. I was not acting out of spite. I was acting out of principle. My legacy, the sum total of my life's work and savings, was a testament to my values. And Marcus had proven that he did not share those values. Attorney Childs drafted the new will with the precision of an architect designing a fortress. It was clear, simple, and legally ironclad. The key clause was the emotional and legal centerpiece. I asked her to read it aloud to me, to hear the words that would redefine my life's final chapter. She cleared her throat and read from the document, her voice giving the legal jargon a powerful, poetic weight. I, Vivian Sinclair, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament. I have one biological child, Marcus Sinclair. However, as my son Marcus has publicly and explicitly refused to name me as his mother, choosing instead to identify me as a janitor, I shall not name him as my son in this, my final testament. It is my express wish that he shall take nothing from my estate. Hearing the words spoken aloud sent a shiver through me. It was a heartbreaking sentence to write, but it was also the most honest sentence I had ever written. It was the final, devastating consequence of his choice in that ballroom. The will continued, laying out the foundation of my new legacy. My entire estate, including all real and personal property, savings, and investments, is to be liquidated upon my death. The proceeds shall be used to create and endow the Vivian Sinclair Community Pride Scholarship. This scholarship is to be awarded annually in perpetuity to a deserving graduating student from Northwood High School who has demonstrated profound respect for their family and a deep commitment to the Birmingham community that supports them. I had done it. I had taken the pain, the disrespect, the erasure, and I had transformed it. I had created something new, something that would live on long after I was gone, something that would honor the values he had discarded. My legacy would no longer be a single, ungrateful son. It would be generations of grateful, community-minded scholars. The story concludes not with a confrontation, but with a quiet, peaceful scene 1 year later. I am sitting in the front row of the Northwood High School auditorium for the senior awards ceremony. The seat beside me is empty. Marcus, I had heard, had been allowed to keep his scholarship after a lengthy review and a series of humiliating apology letters, but he never returned to Birmingham. He was a ghost, a memory. The principal walked to the podium. "And now," she announced, her voice bright with excitement, "it is my great honor to present the first ever Vivian Sinclair Community Pride Scholarship." She called the recipient's name, a brilliant, smiling young woman who had organized a tutoring program for younger students in her neighborhood. As the young woman walked onto the stage, she turned and gestured to the audience. Her mother, her father, and her grandmother stood up, their faces beaming with pride. The student waited until her family was standing beside her on the stage before she accepted the award. I watched them, a family united in pride and respect, and a profound, healing peace washed over me. My son had tried to make me invisible, but I had turned my name into a legacy. He had called me a janitor, a cleaner of rooms. But I had done something far more important. I had cleaned my own house, secured my own legacy, and in the end, I had built a new, brighter room for generations of children to come. And that, I knew, was the most important work of all.